Will you pray with me? Lord, now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. The whole concept of home feels different these days, doesn't it? I've always loved being at home. I've loved staying in at home. I've loved having plans canceled and getting an unexpected night at home. To me, the idea of home has always been about comfort and coziness, family, downtime, stability, security, safety. Turns out that the whole idea of home feels a lot different when it's the only place you're allowed to be for weeks on end. Turns out that no matter where you are, it's hard to feel safe or secure or comfortable or stable when there's a global crisis happening. Of course, home doesn't necessarily mean all those good things to everyone, even in the best of times. There are people for whom home is the most dangerous place to be. And the fact that they are stuck there now is a life-threatening situation. And there are people who are now living in fear of losing their homes. And there are people who already didn't have a home when this whole thing started. For all our cherished notions of home, it's a concept that is actually fraught with complexity. A complexity we are seeing new dimensions of during this strange time. For me, home has always been the thing that has driven me for as long as I can remember. The thing I most wanted. Growing up as an Army brat, I moved a lot. I was 3 weeks old the first time I moved, and I have never gone back even to the city in which I was born. I moved 7 times by the time I was 10, and I went to a new school every year until junior high school. I was always the new kid, which meant I was always trying to figure out the norms and expectations of each new place and the people there. I was always trying to figure out how to fit in, or at least not stick out. I was always trying to figure out how to feel safe, comfortable, like I belonged. I was always trying to figure out how to feel at home. I was fortunate to come from an exceptionally stable family, and we were fortunate that my mother was gifted at turning each new house we lived in into something that felt like home. But I learned along the way that home is about more than the house you live in, and it's about more than the family you live with. You can have the nicest house on the block with the most loving family in the world, and you can still feel the pain of not belonging. You can still feel the threat of living in a world that doesn't truly feel safe. You can still feel the longing for something you don't have. When I was 5 years old, my home situation was made more complicated by the fact that my dad was sent to serve in Saudi Arabia for a year. He and my mother decided it was better that she and my little brother and I stay in Georgia rather than go to Saudi Arabia with him. So he left and we stayed. I knew he was coming back, but it was still so hard. That was the year I started school. It was the year I learned to read. It was the year I jumped in a fire ant pile and we discovered I was deathly allergic to fire ants. I missed my dad so much that year. As soon as my dad got back from Saudi Arabia, we learned he was going to be stationed in Washington, D.C. So we had to move again almost immediately after he got home. My dad left ahead of us so he could find a house for us in Northern Virginia and start getting things ready. I remember being so upset that he was leaving again. And I was also sad to be leaving the place where we lived, which I loved. And I was anxious too, to be going to a place I had never seen before and couldn't even imagine. My dad assured me everything was going to be okay, that it was going to be good. But how could such a place be home? I'm not the only one for whom home is a deep driving force, even a need. I think it's what all of us are looking for on some level. We're looking for that deep, satisfying click of things falling into place, of feeling right and good and safe and comforted, of feeling some kind of wholeness, feeling like we belong, feeling protected, knowing we're loved. Our collective grief right now is about all of this and more. Things do not feel safe or good or comfortable or stable. We do not feel protected. We're separated from people we love. We have no idea what the future holds. We have no idea how to get to a place, a time that does feel safe and secure and stable and right. We have no idea how to get to a place of wholeness when everything right now is so fractured and we're so isolated. The friends of Jesus surely felt the same way. On the last night of his life, Jesus had supper with them and washed their feet and predicted that one of them would betray him and gave them a new commandment to love each other the way he loved them. And then he said he was getting ready to go. He was getting ready to leave them. He told them, "Where I am going, you cannot come." And they were devastated. I can imagine the grief, the fear in that room, despite his assurances to them. It would be there, those big, hard feelings. Do not let your hearts be troubled, he tells them. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. I'm going to prepare a place for you, and I will come again, and I will take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. Do you hear it? He's talking about home. It's translated here as dwelling places. You may have grown up hearing it the way I did, as mansions. In my Father's house, there are many mansions, but it doesn't mean mansions the way we picture big fancy houses. The actual word here is abode, which connects with the word abide, not only in English, but also in Greek. In the Gospel of John, it's actually the very first thing his soon-to-be disciples ask him. They say, "Where are you staying?" Which means, where are you abiding? The word they ask is directly connected to the word he says here. They say, "Where are you abiding?" And he says, in response to that first question, "Come and see." And later he will tell them, "Abide in me as I abide in you." Abide. Stay. And here now, after this language, this talk of staying, here he tells them he's leaving for home, for an abode, for a place to abide, with the promise that they will eventually get there too. He's trying to tell them their pain will not be forever, even though it's huge right now. He assures them, "You know the way to the place where I'm going." Thomas is having none of it. In their fear and confusion and horror at what he is telling them, they want certainty. "Lord," he says, "we don't even know where you're going. How can we know the way?" And I get it. I get it. Don't you? They're contemplating a future without their leader, without their friend, the person they've given up everything to follow. It's a bleak picture for them to contemplate. They can't even imagine a future without him. They have followed him all the way into Jerusalem with certain hopes and expectations. And now he's telling them he's leaving. In a matter of moments, with just a few words, he's taken away everything they expected. The future they had planned on has just disappeared. They don't even know what's supposed to happen next. They have no idea where they're going from here. How can they know the way? How can we know the way? They ask. And Jesus says to them, "I am the way. I am the way. I am the way and the truth and the life." There's no map. There's not even a clearly marked path. No predictable plan. Just this person, Jesus. He does not give them certainty. He gives them himself. And he gives them the assurance that they do know him, and so they do know how to move forward. They do know how to keep going. They don't think they know enough. They don't think they have enough. They want certainty about the future, about their own abilities. They're not going to get that. Jesus is not in the certainty business. He's in the relationship business. And relationship is messy and evolving and scary and demanding and transformative. Relationship calls for patience. It calls for vulnerability. It calls for mutuality. It calls for trust. There is a home for you, he's telling them. You will be safe. You will be okay. You belong. You have a place with me. You have a future that is good, and I am in it. You know the way because you know me. His word is for us too, of course. And have we ever needed it more than we need it now? We sit in homes that no longer feel quite like home, and we keep up with news that keeps shaking us to the core. And we stare out at the weeks and months and years ahead, and we can hardly imagine what to even hope for anymore. We don't even know where we're going. How can we know the way to get there? And Jesus says, I am the way. If we know him, then we know more than we might think we do right now. If we know him, then we know something true about what matters and what is real and what we can count on. Thomas asks for a plan, and what he gets is a person. It's what we get too, the person of Jesus, and also each other. At a time when all our plans have been stripped away and time itself seems to have almost no meaning, we still have this. We still have this relationship, community, people. When Jesus tells the disciples they know the way forward, he says it right after he gives them the new command to love each other as he has loved them. This is who he is, this self-giving love. This is the way, this self-giving love. It has always been the way to know him, the way to see him, the way to find him, the way to follow him, the way to follow the way to find a home, to love people, just to love no matter what comes. When the world keeps spinning towards disaster, this is still the way. Love each other with patience, mutuality, vulnerability, trust. Writer and farmer Wendell Berry once said, "It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey." When I was 6 years old, and my dad had just gotten back from Saudi Arabia and almost immediately left for Virginia, I was sad and scared and confused. But of course, I was only 6, so nothing about any of it depended on me. There were no plans for me to make. I just had to get in the car when the time came and ride the long road from Georgia to Virginia. When you're a kid, the only thing you can do is just get in and trust. I feel a lot like a kid these days. And I will never forget what it felt like back then to pull into the driveway that afternoon. The driveway of the the home I had never seen. It was bigger than I had imagined, and it was so beautiful. And there was a surprise in the backyard, something I had wanted my whole short little life. It was a dog, a Saint Bernard, which is what I had been dreaming of and begging for. But best of all was my dad standing in the driveway. My whole family together. We were home. It was just like my dad had promised, except better. Do not let your hearts be troubled, Jesus tells his disciples and us, which seems like a lot to ask right now when we are scared and sad and uncertain. There's so much we don't know right now and so much we can't yet see. But we know enough. We know enough. We know Jesus. We know love. We know community. We know death and resurrection. We know the courage that comes with vulnerability. We know patience. We know the mess and the beauty and the mutuality of relationship and community. We know trust. We know we have a place. We know we have a home. We know we have a future and a hope. We know the way.